All right, we're back, ready for our second and final speaker of the evening. You hopefully got some, hopefully not cold pizza. And apparently you've drank all the drinks, so good for you. Okay, and for the sake of editing consistency, I'm going to read you Samuel's 3 fun facts once again. Number 1, Samuel still has some of his baby teeth. Number 2, his favorite genre of fiction is books about child spies. And number 3, he was once the spelling bee champion of North York. Pretty sure I said New York last time. Whoops. All right, that's still pretty good. Let's give it up for Samuel.
So it's September 2021, and I'm living in Whistler in British Columbia. And you may ask yourself, what's a Caribbean Canadian Toronto man like myself doing out in Whistler? And so I would ask the same question if I were you. So I had moved there a year prior because the pandemic wasn't for me, believe it or not. I don't know if other people feel differently, but I wasn't a fan. And part of what I didn't like about it was the fact that my favorite things about Toronto I was no longer able to access, including my friends and family. So I was sick of lockdowns. I moved out to British Columbia thinking, they can't lock down a mountain. That was my thought process. So this is me in winter 2020, but our story starts in September 2021 when I was basically sick of Whistler. I didn't have any friends to speak of. I was working a job that I didn't like, and worst of all, my place, which I loved, I was being kicked out of. Not because I did anything wrong, but because there was a housing crisis happening in Whistler. And my landlord was moving into my place and taking over my lease. So I was at a bit of a crossroads. I didn't know what was next. I didn't know where my life was going. I wanted to stay in Whistler, but I didn't know where else I would go. And then a friend of mine calls me. He's an entrepreneur. He says, I have this amazing idea for a personal development retreat company. And I say, ooh, tell me more. He tells me more. What I like about it is his idea is to have a month-long recurring personal development retreat on the beach. And so up to that point, I had been, intermittently interested in personal development in the sense of watching TED Talks and starting books and not finishing them. But I had never really dug deep. And what I liked about this was rather than having to focus on personal development individually, our clients would be able to access services from professionals in a group context, on a team, and it would be in a fun, relaxing environment on the beach, which I loved. So we decided to start the company. He would be the CEO, I would be the ops guy. And I left Whistler, packed all my bags, put everything in storage, and moved, I thought, to Quebec. Really what I was doing was becoming a digital nomad because I haven't had a home since. But yeah, so I flew across the country to Quebec, and we started to lay the foundation for the business. And this was a tough time in some senses because I didn't really know how to have my voice, right? We were both strong personalities, but ultimately it was his idea, his vision, and I didn't know, when I should stand my ground or when I should let him have his way. I didn't know when I should give in or when I should give up, essentially. So it was very confusing for me and for us. Eventually we got over that initial hump, and things started flowing pretty smoothly for a bit, right? We learned how to work together to a degree. We looked for funds. We had funding come in, which was great. When the money comes, it's always a good feeling. And it was almost too good of a feeling because I started living like I had already arrived, right? I dipped into my personal savings. I was living like a king in some senses. So we flew down to Mexico, and we began to broker the deal for the resort that was going to be our resort partner. We hired a bunch of staff. We got speakers in all kinds of disciplines, all kinds of fields. This is me working in Riviera Maya, Mexico, at the resort that we actually booked our agreement with. And like I said, I was living it up. I was having a great time. This is This is the most expensive party that I've ever been to in my life. It's at a beach club in Tulum. I don't even want to tell you how expensive it was. I'll save that for the Q&A if anybody really wants to know. But it was wild. And it was around that time that things started to sour a bit. From a business standpoint, our marketing team wasn't doing what they were expected to. Our website wasn't up yet. Our accounting and legal team, the direction that we were giving them wasn't sufficient for them to really thrive. And worst of all, it was now November turning into December of 2021, and we still didn't have any sales for our first event, which was starting in February. And we began to panic. The pressure got to us. Our relationship frayed. Now, we're living in Mexico. I didn't have too much experience in Mexico up to that point. We're splitting an Airbnb, my co-founder and I, and we're together basically 24/7, which I wouldn't recommend. And that's tricky because we have different ways that we recharge. We have different balances of introvert and extrovert. We're just different people ultimately. And living together 24/7 really strained our relationship. We began to fight more and more often. And I'm talking screaming matches at 5 a.m., sober screaming matches at 5 a.m. And things really began to fray, culminating into Christmas Day 2025. So I'm in a foreign country with this guy, and we're barely getting along at this point. I decide to cook Christmas dinner. Little did I know that in Mexico, everything closes on Christmas and the day before. So I had almost no access to anything to prepare a Christmas dinner that was supposed to bring us together. So this is the dinner that I came up with. And don't worry, it tastes worse than it looks. So yeah, didn't work out. The next day, Boxing Day, we decide to part ways. We have a long conversation. We think it's going to be better for the business if we live separately. The only problem is I wasn't financially or emotionally or mentally or physically or spiritually or intellectually prepared to live separately by myself in Mexico where I knew nobody. So I moved to a different town. Unfortunately, I didn't speak the language. I didn't know how things worked, so I ended up staying in overpriced hotels that were both overpriced and below average in quality at the same time. And I did that for maybe 3 weeks, burned through a bunch of money, and that was, for me, the lowest point of this journey. I didn't know anybody. Co-founder and I were barely speaking. Our business was failing. I was almost broke. I didn't know how to navigate anything, didn't know who to turn to. I just felt really alone with no hope, ultimately. And this is when things began to turn for the better. First of all, I found better food. So I didn't make this, which was key. If your food is not as good, there's probably somebody else near you who can make better food than you. Pro tip. So that was one of the first thing, found better food. Second thing, I began to meet more people. And in meeting more people, I found some amazing mentors, some amazing friends who were there for me in a variety of ways. Some of the ways that they were there for me, encouraging me, giving me sound advice. I even had a friend who, after knowing her for 3 days, she gave me the keys to her place and went back home to the US and gave me somewhere to stay for 2 weeks free of charge. And it really restored my faith in people, people who had nothing to gain from helping me. Most importantly to me, though, it restored my faith in a higher power or in God. So I would have called myself Christian up to that point, but that didn't really mean too much to me. I didn't have much connection to faith or to spirituality at that point. But at my moment of most need, I reached out for something bigger than myself, something stronger than myself that I could hold on to, and I found a sense of peace that I can't really explain beyond that. So that was a special time. So before we get to March, it's February 2022 now. Our retreat is supposed to have started. Guess what? Spoiler alert, there is no retreat. We have at this point recruited 3 guests at a loss to ourselves. So not only do we have we signed them up in a way that financially disadvantages us, we have to refund them when the retreat gets canceled. I step away from the business. My co-founder and I decide to go our separate ways. And I'm at another crossroads, yet again. What do I do next? So the options I have available to me at that point, I can either continue on in Mexico and try to figure something out, or I can pivot and head back to Canada and with my tail between my legs and hope my parents will accept me. I decided to stay in Mexico on the beach. I don't know, where I found the courage. But no, in all seriousness, the reason I decided to stay in Mexico is because I had made a lot of good entrepreneur connections. And in the process of developing a personal development company, I had been applying some of the principles that I had been learning from people who knew more than myself in business, on mindset, etc. And I had made a decision that I wanted to be somebody who created money with my mind, who learned how to generate money using my ideas and my abilities beyond trading time for money. So I made that pivot, and so the next question was, well, what kind of business am I going to do? So I tried a bunch of things. I tried business strategy, I tried VA work, I tried property management, and I was just trying to figure out anything. I was grasping at straws, and I did that for 2 months. It was a special 2 months because I learned so much, and yet I made so little, right? In terms of actual income, bottom line, my financial situation was worse after those 2 months passed than it was at the beginning. So much so that I had to rent out one of my properties in the morning, and that deal had to close in order for me to have enough cash to pay for my rent in the afternoon. So fortunately, that deal went through. But by now, it's April 2022, and as much as I've made some amazing connections and friends and had a really special time, I have to figure out, okay, am I going to continue this? So I put together a plan in conjunction with my mentors where I'm going to execute a 2-year working plan to rebuild my finances. I'm going to find a job. I'll work that job for up to 2 years. And in that time, if through my business, which I decided is going to be a business strategy agency, I make enough money to cover 6 months of expenses, or I have 6 consecutive months where my business income is greater than my employment income, I'm going to step away and I'm going to work full-time at my business. And thankfully, earlier this year, 1 year into that 2-year plan, I hit those milestones, and I've been transitioned to my full-time. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So what did I learn? Well, I learned that it's probably a good idea to keep your business and your personal money separate, right? The way that I was handling that, I wouldn't recommend to anybody. Secondly, it's probably a good idea to keep your business partner and yourself separate, at least for some of the time, at least for a portion of the time. I also learned that it's important to find and hold space for your voice, right? Had I spoken up in certain ways at certain times, perhaps some of the results we had would have been different. And finally, I learned that there's help available, beyond myself, that there are good people out there who will be there for you in times of need. And I also learned that there is a power greater than myself, something higher, something stronger available in times of need for spiritual support as well. That's all. Thanks, everyone.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daniel. We have time for some questions.